Hello everyone, this is Dr. Zeko from marriagecrisis.com, and first I would like to bring your attention to the page about me where you can find a photo and some background information about myself. Today's tutorial is about marriage, and it is based on my book titled Defining the New Testament Logia on Divorce and Remarriage in a Pluralistic Context. Something interesting about the book is that it is in Vatican's library, and it is my published doctorate which I finished in the University of Ljubljana, Slovenia, the Catholic Faculty of Theology. Something interesting about the doctorate is that the conclusions I reached did not support the Catholic view on divorce and remarriage, and yet I was awarded the highest grade and summa cum laude distinction for my doctorate. If you want to read more about these topics in the book, you can order it from my website or from Amazon. Let's go to today's tutorial, Mapping Marriage. And here I am using Mind Manager to define the main concepts and their relationships. We will start with defining marriage. Marriage is considered related to establishing both personal and social models of relationships. On personal level, marriage is a relational model, a framework for companionship, support, and raising children. On social level, marriage is an institution, social model for supportive relationships. My definition extends further to consider the biblical view of marriage. And here I explore the Old Testament view of marriage, which is a covenantal relationship. We see it represented by the relationship between God and Israel. New Testament presents the same view of marriage as covenant, and we see it in the relationship between Christ and the church. My definition extends further to include the interpretation of the Bible about the topic of marriage, so hermeneutical aspect of the definition of marriage. And here I consider the Protestant theology of marriage and family. 6 main streams are highlighted. 5 of them are about nurturing of the marriage and nurturing of the marital covenantal relationship. 1 stream is about resolution of marital crisis. So let's see about these 6 streams of marriage covenant. The first is about mutual companionship, and here I consider moral, spiritual, emotional, physical, intellectual, and social elements. Starting with the moral. Marriage is a commitment of the spouses to fulfill the moral obligations. Spiritual, we have the commitment of the spouses to spiritual responsibilities. Emotional, we have the provision of romance. Physical, we have the provision of intimacy. Intellectual is about the commitment of the spouses to meet their intellectual needs. And social is about meeting their social needs. Marriage as covenant refers to the spouse's character. And here I consider 4 elements: honesty, trust, openness, and acceptance. Honesty is about the commitment of the spouses to share the truth with each other. Trust is the commitment of the spouses to marital fidelity. Openness is about sharing daily. And acceptance is about the unconditional love of the spouses towards each other with acceptance, forgiveness, and repentance. Next element of the covenant is Christian faith, and here we have the spiritual and religious commitments of the spouses towards each other for mutual provision of encouragement, support, and help, towards the family, spiritual investment into each other's life, in the life of the children, towards other Christians, and here we have the participation of the spouses in the larger Christian community. And towards community, and here we talk about altruistic social impact. The next element of the marriage covenant is moral framework. And here I consider 4 important elements: Love refers to the unconditional love of the spouses towards each other, which highlights the fulfillment of the moral obligations. Justice refers to the egalitarian model of marriage, which is about the provision of freedom for one's choice and desire. Freedom is about the empowering of the spouses for the fulfillment of their goals. And finally, order is a provision of stability and enablement for the development of flexibility in time of change. Next element of the covenantal relationship is about boundaries. And here we consider two important parts. The first one is about mutually agreed boundaries between the spouses. And then the next one is about functional boundaries. Here we have the spouses' negotiation in order to adapt the boundaries in light of change. Finally, we have the marital crisis, the sixth stream of marriage covenant. And here we need to consider the lifelong nature of marriage. This is represented in the creation account, where marriage is clearly depicted as a covenant. We see in Genesis 2:21 to 24 the interchangeable reflection between God and man expressed in the unity of the two genders in one flesh. We also see the language, living and cleaving, which is a covenantal language. This teaching here becomes very important for the teaching of Jesus about the topic of marriage. Next one, we move to covenantal stipulations of marriage, and here we talk about food, clothing, and love. When we go to Exodus 21:10 to 11, we see the law of the slave wife. This law is about the obligations of the husband to fulfill the covenantal obligation with provision of food, clothes, and conjugal rights to the slave wife in spite of the appearance of the second wife. If these covenantal stipulations are not met, not fulfilled, then the slave wife is free from the bond of marriage and slavery. And now we see these covenantal obligations in the New Testament as well. In Ephesians 5:25 to 33, a very important passage for the understanding of marriage in all Christian traditions. And here we see the concept of care, based on an example of how man loves his own body and takes care of it by feeding it and clothing it. He is encouraged in the same way to take care of his wife. The emphasis here is on love as well, how man is to love his wife. And we have the example of this being met in the relationship between Christ and the church. Next element of marital crisis is about reconciliation. Here we'll go to Paul. In 1 Corinthians 7:11, we see how he uses Jesus' teaching on the permanency of marriage. And here we see that Paul faces the inadequate attitude towards the marriage covenant shaped by culture and society, and his solution is reconciliation. Then we go to the final element of the marital crisis. And here we speak about the breakdown of marriage, and this is based on violation of the covenant stipulations. We have this in the Old Testament. In Hosea 2:2, we see Yahweh divorces Israel due to the violation of the covenant stipulations. And then in the New Testament, we see the covenant violation on the grounds of sexual misconduct in Matthew and on the grounds of desertion in Paul. If you want to read more about these topics, you can go and check the book. Now we'll go to the challenges of marriage. As I mentioned, marriage is a social institution, and these social challenges are about to deinstitutionalize the marriage. And here we face the challenge of consumerism. Consumerism is about quality and value satisfaction. And so if one of the spouses is not satisfied with the other, they are searching for another spouse, an alternative spouse. Then we have separation, and here I refer to easy divorce and remarriage, once again in the search of a better option. We have the phenomenon of serial monogamy here as well. Next one is cohabitation, and here we are lacking the legal supportive framework of marriage for spouses and children. Next challenge is contraceptives. Here we have the positive role of the contraceptives in marriage when planning for children, and their negative role for exploring sexual desires outside of marriage. Abortion and illegitimacy is the next challenge, and here we find the child not being provided with the relevant supportive framework of marriage. Sexual evolution is about exploration of sexual desires outside of marriage. And finally, homosexuality is about undermining the marriage as union of opposite genders and the environment for procreation. We move to domestic challenges, and these ones are about the failure in understanding marital relationship. Here we have the challenge of physical abuse, which is violence against the spouse. The next challenge is about emotional abuse, using emotional means against the spouse. Then we have the challenge of sexual abuse, nonverbal, verbal, physical, and other against the spouse. The challenge of economic abuse, material mistreatment of the spouse. And finally, the challenge of spiritual abuse, misuse of religion and spirituality against the spouse. Here we have the mapping of marriage. And I'm thankful that you have been part of this tutorial together with me. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.